everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We're going to be taking all of your questions today as we have time to, so if you've got a question, make sure you fire that into the chat box so that I can help you get it answered. In addition, don't forget to hit that like button. The more you hit the like, the more subscribers we reach, and I appreciate your help on that. As I come to help you, come to help me as well. And let's dive in. So, question, no, that's a comment. Let's see here. So Juan's asking about why doctors insist on prescribing vitamin D2 versus vitamin D3. Simple answer, a couple of them actually. Number one, vitamin D2, ergocalciferol, is a prescription drug that I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think it's under patent, and so I think it's easy for a traditional medical doctor to reach for that prescription pad and be able to have a patient fill that D2. Whereas vitamin D3 is a supplement, not a prescription, so there can't be a patent. So it's pretty much going to be buying it over the counter unless the doctor carries it in their practice, which most medical doctors, not all, but many don't carry supplementation pharmacies within their practices. So probably a lot of it is ease of use, the ease to grab that pad, and probably also a lot of it is just lack of knowledge. Many doctors couldn't tell you the difference between an ergo or a cholecalciferol, and that's unfortunate, but that's just the reality. Can a low AST or ALT be problematic? Not in my experience or knowledge. There may be somebody else who has a different opinion about that, but I haven't ever seen low AST or ALT in someone be really a problem. For those of you who don't know what that is, AST and ALT are liver enzymes, and so generally speaking, when they're high, they can indicate that there's a problem going on in the liver or liver duress. But when they're low, not so much anything I've ever seen clinically to have to worry about. How to naturally get rid of tophi in the knee due to knee synovial inflammation. So if you've got synovial inflammation in the knee, I mean, first things first, Sophia, I would say, get with your doctor to rule out an autoimmune inflammatory condition, because typically synovial inflammation and tophi formation are hallmark of autoimmune arthritis. So then the next thought there would be why, right? So the biggest reason why we'll see autoimmune arthritis develop, in my experience anyways, food induction of an autoimmune process. The most common food is gluten, which is why I spend so much time talking about gluten. So, if you haven't been tested for gluten sensitivity, that might be something that you want to do. But generally speaking, once you understand and you remove the triggers from an autoimmune problem, then the body has the capacity to heal itself. And so that's what I would encourage you to do first and foremost. Linda's asking, my grandson has asthma and is recovering from a bout of pneumonia. He continues to have episodes of low oxygen. Is this normal? It's not abnormal, especially if he's still got some kind of lingering, ongoing inflammation as he's recovering. One of the best supplements to support a person during this time, Linda, is NAC, N-acetylcysteine. If that were my son or grandson, that would be the first supplement that I would have them take, depending on how old and how much they weigh, but I'd start them out anywhere from 500 to 3,000 milligrams, again, depending on the size. What vitamin deficiency causes canker sores? So canker sores usually are not caused per se by a vitamin deficiency, Jacqueline. They're more linked to, so canker sores for many people are caused by a type of virus. There's a type of herpes virus that actually can contribute to canker sores. And so what happens a lot of times, the reason canker sores will flare is either somebody is eating a food that is overwhelming their immune system, so that virus, and by the way, we all have herpes virus inside of us. I'm not talking about sexually transmitted herpes, I'm talking about type 1, herpes simplex type 1, which is what forms canker sores. We all have that virus, but when we're under a lot of stress whether that's food stress, we're eating bad food, or whether it's emotional stress or too much physical stress, then it increases the risk that that virus can come out and contribute to the formation of canker sores. So what helps, though, what will support the recovery from that, one of the big things is vitamin C and lysine. So when you combine vitamin C and lysine, a lot of times, especially at higher doses, right at the first sign of a canker sore, a lot of times they won't even form, at least not in my experience. We have a product called Virid, V-I-R-I-D, that we use to support people who have kind of a chronic recurring canker sore formation issue. And so again, at the first sign, most people will start to feel like a little soreness or a little pain, depending on where you get them, whether you get them on the outside of the mouth or on the inside of the mouth. And you start taking, Virid right away, and a lot of times they'll fail to form, and then you won't have to go through that full blister formation and then the weeks of recovery of pain that comes with them. Let's see here. My chiropractor said that our gut bacteria should be 85% good and 15% bad. Does that bad bacteria serve any purpose? I don't agree with the terminology good or bad. I think we have a milieu of different bacteria. A lot of times when I culture people's GI tracts, we'll find, tons of bacteria that would be traditionally thought of as bad, like staph or strep. These bacteria are not necessarily bad. Where they become problematic is if they grow to a great extent. Then they overgrow. It's kind of like weeds in the garden. A little bit of weeds, not a big deal, but if your garden is overrun by weeds, you now have a problem, trying to grow your crop. So it's the same thing in the gut. These what a lot of times are referred to as bad bacteria are really not bad bacteria. It's just if they get too strong or if they reach a particular level, they can start to create problems. It's an imbalance that occurs. So I don't like to get into that game of calling things good or bad. We always lose in that because, cholesterol has been demonized as an example, since the early 80s. Cholesterol has been demonized as a cause of heart disease. And so doctors have said good and bad cholesterol, even though bad cholesterol, won a Nobel Prize because you need it to form synapses in the brain. So I don't like getting into that good-bad game. I think they're all important. I think it's a matter of balance. Many black nails or many black lines in the nail beds. So if you've got like little vertical black marks in the nails, that can be a sign of liver issue. We'll see that a lot of times. You see it in people that have had mold exposure. We'll see it in people that drink too much alcohol. And the alcohol is harmful or hurting their liver. We'll see it in a lot of patients that have, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as well. So it's a common symptom that can show up as a result of liver struggles. Would betaine hydrochloride, apple cider vinegar, or something else help to prevent? Not sure where the rest of that question is.
Right here.
Montezuma's Revenge. That's okay, Melanie. So the question is, will betaine hydrochloride, which is an acid, or apple cider vinegar, which is also an acid, help possibly with picking up an overdose of bacteria from Mexico or somewhere down south that could, potentiate a nasty spell of diarrhea? Not so much in my experience. The best thing in my experience to use if you're looking for a supplement to support you would be ultrabiotic defense or high doses of probiotics, upwards of 200 billion colony forming units. Acid, not so much, but the probiotic definitely. I've had cases where people came in and had that very same problem. We put them on, 2 to 400 billion colony forming units and cleans it up in a day or two a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's, if you're trying to, again, go the natural route, that can be very effective. Too many liposomal supplements, can too many liposomal supplements cause issues over time? I don't have any side effects yet after 1 month use. I don't think so. Not if they're natural liposomals. I mean, you get into some of the synthetic liposomals, and some of those are known to have side effects, but natural liposomals made from phospholipids, a lot of times derived from different plants, usually are pretty well tolerated. Where we get into trouble in the gluten realm, men, is some of these liposomals, they use corn derivative. And so again, my experience with, I know many of you are thinking gluten, there's no corn in gluten, but there's a type of gluten in corn called zein, which can cause inflammatory damage in people with gluten sensitivity. And so a lot of people will do poorly with those types of liposomals. So just check your label and your ingredient. If you're gluten sensitive, I don't recommend using liposomals that are derived from corn. John asks, how do fiber supplements like Metamucil have gluten molecules? No, I mean, probably not. As a brand, you'd want to call the company, from the perspective of are they focused on producing that product, that fiber product, in a manufacturing environment that will shield it from gluten cross-contamination? And do they do proper testing once the product is produced to ensure that there's no gluten in the product? So that really is key. But generally speaking, like Metamucil fiber, which is it's a brand name, but it's just a type of psyllium fiber. It by itself is gluten-free. And if you're looking for a tested product and trusted product, I'd recommend Ultra Fiber, which is a product that we produce at Gluten Free Society. Let's see, what do you know, good day, how do you know, or what do you know about chiropractors who practice NIS? I can't say that I'm familiar with NIS, Diana, so can't really intelligently comment on that. How can acid reflux be avoided after taking alpha-lipoic acid on an empty stomach? No, take it with food, Mario. I mean, that would be the way that you would, if it's bothering you, take it with food. It will not affect or negate its absorption. You should still be able to absorb it just fine. The other issue there is a lot of, check your product, because maybe it's the alpha-lipoic acid's effect on your stomach, but it could be the fillers. A lot of times when people are bothered by products, it can be the fillers, not always, but it's a possibility. And a lot of fillers, especially in the realm, again, if you're gluten sensitive, a lot of these fillers can be grain derived, and you want to be careful about that. Are there more men or women with gluten sensitivity / celiac disease? I'd say there's more women diagnosed, but not necessarily more women. There's a whole conundrum between men and women and how they perceive healthcare. And generally speaking, women are more intuitive. They're more likely to seek out guidance, counsel, or advice when it comes to health issues, where a man, oftentimes they'll wait for their arm to fall off before they go see a doctor, so to speak. So I think that there's if we look at the literature, there's a higher tendency of women to have the diagnosis, but there's also a higher tendency of women to visit their doctors. And I think that's where that discrepancy is, because in my experience working with both men and women, I don't see a trend one way or the other. They're both equally affected, in my experience, by gluten. Sarah wants to know, what is insulin resistance in your opinion, and does gluten sensitivity play any role in the condition? So insulin resistance is where generally what happens is people eat too many carbohydrates, right? And the more carbohydrates in your diet, especially processed carbohydrates that you consume, the more demand on your pancreas to produce insulin. So the more you demand your pancreas to produce insulin, the higher your insulin levels go. Over time, the insulin receptors themselves become desensitized to high levels of insulin. And so there's a resistance there, meaning insulin doesn't work as effectively. So insulin resistance is in a sense, it's a precursor to diabetes. Now, does gluten play a role in that? Yes. There's several roles that we suspect gluten to play a role. There's some research indicating that gluten actually contributes to the development of autoimmune diabetes, type 1 diabetes, where where it's been shown that there's a relationship between gluten inducing that autoimmune response to the beta cells of the pancreas. And I have actually seen numerous cases of type 1 diabetes dramatically improve and reduce their need for higher doses of insulin, meaning that if you're type 1 diabetic and your pancreas is basically, your beta function is demised to the point where you need to go on insulin, generally speaking, we're not going to see a gluten-free diet reverse that, okay? But what we do see a gluten-free diet do is dramatically reduce that person's need for more insulin. Remember, the more insulin you have to take over your lifetime, insulin, is you need it if you're type 1 diabetic, but insulin also, too much, if you take too much over time, it increases the risk for the development of many types of diseases of aging. So you really want to try to minimize your need for insulin, even if you're a type 1 diabetic. But gluten definitely plays a role in that. Now, gluten also plays a role in creating micronutrient deficiencies. So, for example, zinc, to properly make insulin requires zinc and magnesium. And we know that, for example, gluten can cause those deficiencies. We also know that your insulin receptors are made out of chromium and vitamin B3. We know that people with gluten sensitivity have a higher prevalence of being deficient in those nutrients because of malabsorption issues. So the deficiencies that come with gluten-related problems can definitely contribute to development of insulin, glucose-insulin interaction or insulin problems altogether. So the answer is a very much yes. Now, beyond gluten, we can look at grain as a whole, and grain as a food is super, super high carbohydrate, and most people overconsume it. So, the overconsumption of carbohydrates being one of the primary drivers of the problem, although not necessarily is that directly gluten, but many of the foods that contain gluten also contain those excessive carbohydrates. Let's see here.
I have a translation for that dark-eyes question.
Okay. Yeah.
I have severe nerve pain. I've had it for 4 years now. I've tried 2 months without gluten with no improvement. Do you think if I stay away from all grains, my nerve pain will go away?
Okay, yeah, so Dark is asking, he's been gluten-free for 2 months because he's testing the diet for a neuropathy, and his neuropathy has not improved, but he has not been grain-free. So the question is, if I go grain-free, is there an opportunity that my neuropathy might improve more? The answer is yes. I see this all the time. People with severity of neuropathy. As a matter of fact, you can go, if you go look at, we have a playlist on our YouTube channel that is called Testimonials. And there's a story of one woman who had what was called ascending paralysis. So she had such a severe neuropathy that it actually put her in a wheelchair. And in her case, a big part of that was she had gone gluten-free, but the problem wasn't clearing. But when we took her grain-free, problem went away, and she got out of her wheelchair and was able to dance again. So there's a strong possibility that it might help you. Now, there could be other things going on as well, because neuropathy has more than one driving agent or one driving cause. Nutritional deficiencies, things like B12 and vitamin B5 and vitamin B1 and folate and alpha lipoic acid and vitamin E. These are all things that we know, when deficient, can contribute to nerve damage and can be a kind of a hallmark of holding you back from healing. So, those are things that you should get with your doctor and make sure they're being, your nutrition status is being tested, and that way you can have that information and possibly not only change to a grain-free diet, but also supplement with any deficits that you need to help your body heal. Is it possible that supplementation with nitric oxide to recover better and faster nerve damage? I know your video about the nerve system, but NO was not mentioned. So nitric oxide is, where nitric oxide can be helpful is in the vasodilation of blood vessels is one of its major effects. I think that discovery won a Nobel Prize. And so nitric oxide helps the blood vessels dilate. Now, theoretically, and again, this is theoretically, I have not seen taking nitric oxide supplements to be helpful for neuropathy. But theoretically, if you improve blood flow, if that blood vessel is feeding and nourishing the nerve, then maybe there's going to be an impact there. But I have not seen, using nitric oxide supplements to be a vast change or a great improvement in people with neuropathy. Usually where there's a neuropathy, my experience is B vitamins are a primary driver, physical dysfunction's a primary driver, so like herniated discs, thoracic outlet syndrome, impingement syndromes, things of that nature. But again, not so much nitric oxide. Let's see here. Since I got COVID over a year ago, I have gotten a headache every single day. You probably want to get, if post-COVID you're having a lot of headaches. COVID is one of those things that can really drive the inflammatory cascade, and that the longer you're inflamed, the more stress and pressure that's going to have on your nutrient levels. So Victoria, my advice to you would be get with your doctor and ask them to check those and see if there's something going on there. You might also look at our blog on migraine and headache triggers, because there could be something else going on that COVID sparked, but now that COVID is gone for you, that something else is lingering as a result of the damage COVID created. Is chlorine in swimming pools a problem? I think it depends on several factors, Mary. Number one is whether it's an indoor pool or an outdoor pool. The indoor pools, public pools, they really use heavy quantities of chlorine, and then the gas vapors will form on the surface of the water, and so as you're trying to swim, you're breathing that in. That could be a problem, depending on your level of exposure, the time that you're in that environment. If you have a thyroid illness, excessive chlorine can actually impede iodine uptake into the thyroid gland, and so for those of you with a potential thyroid problem, that might not be the best thing for you to do. Now, if it's an outdoor pool, there's plenty of air around you and you're getting in it on the occasion, I don't think you should be worried, although a lot of people do have chlorine reactions with their skin. So you get into chlorinated water, for example, and your skin becomes inflamed or becomes irritated, and those of you who have that experience should be more cautious around your exposure. But as a general rule of thumb, outdoor pool occasional use, probably not a big deal. It's those indoor pools that are hyperchlorinated, especially public pools, because they use a lot more chlorine. Now, if you've got a pool at home and you want to reduce your need for chlorine, depending on where you live in the South like me, you're not going to have a zero chlorine pool. Even the saltwater pools, actually generate a form of chlorine to basically diminish the bacterial growth and the algal growth in the pool. But they make copper and silver filters that can reduce the need for excessive chlorine. So that's something to consider if you're trying to go lower chlorine in your life. Okay. Is red rice gluten-free like wild rice? Don't recommend it. Do you have any knowledge of the prebiotic Saccharomyces boulardii? Yes, but I don't know what you're asking me specifically. What I like to use Saccharomyces for is when people have a yeast overgrowth or recurring yeast problems. Women sometimes get recurring vaginal yeast infection or recurring GI yeast overgrowth. And Saccharomyces boulardii is a type of yeast that inhibits or competes with Candida, which is one of the major types of yeast in humans that can create problems. So Saccharomyces is a good way to create competition for Candida's growth, and so many people find it very beneficial. All right, okay, so Meg's asking about antiphospholipid antibody disease. Are there any actions I can take? Yeah, in my experience, no grain, no pain. If you don't have the book, go get it, read it, apply it, and come back in 2 months and let us know how your antibodies are dropping and how you're feeling. I've seen a number of cases of antiphospholipid problems improve dramatically with that diet. Now, if you don't want to guess, go get tested. Get tested for gluten sensitivity, get tested for other foods. If you haven't watched, the past 3 weeks, Meg, we've been doing a prolonged series on how to beat autoimmunity naturally. And so if you haven't watched those, I highly encourage you to watch those. It's a 3-part series where I spell out exactly. So even if you aren't a doctor per se, I spell out exactly which kinds of tests to ask for, which kinds of things you want your doctor to help you investigate. We talk about the triggers of autoimmune disease in a much greater degree of detail. than just the generic go no grain, no pain. But if you're trying for an easy solution today, something you can start today, no grain, no pain is a great place to be. All right, my ferritin is low at 21 and I'm not absorbing oral iron. My doctor wants to do an infusion with vinifer. Is this safe? Why aren't you absorbing iron would be my question, Catherine. Before wanting to do infusions, you know, the question that I would want to know an answer to is what's going on that you're not absorbing the iron. There's one thing, not more than one, but one thing in particular, Catherine, that comes to mind when there's what's known as a refractory iron deficiency anemia, and that's occult blood loss, meaning that something's damaging your intestines or your GI tract so that you have bleeding internally, and that blood comes out in your stool, and it's not always obvious. So like, it's not like with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, these are inflammatory bowel diseases where people are pooping blood out all the time, because that's one way to lose iron. This has more to do with there's damage higher up in the intestine, in the small intestine or in the stomach. And by the time that blood makes it out in your stool, it's been oxidized. So it's the same color as stool. It's brown, so you don't see it. That's why it's called occult blood. So you know, what I would encourage you to do is talk to your doctor about running an occult blood test, because if you've got occult blood loss, your iron will never come up. Even if you get an infusion, you know, it won't be long in that infusion. If you're losing iron consistently day in and day out because of internal blood loss, you're never going to correct it, even with an infusion. So you want to know why that's happening. So looking for occult blood would be one thing, and then identifying, you know, if there's damage in your GI tract that might be leading to malabsorption. Now, celiacs are super well known to have iron absorption issues. As a matter of fact, iron deficiency anemia is one of the hallmark findings that shows up long before villus atrophy. So long before the GI doctor can see damage to the GI tract, chronic persistent iron deficiency anemias can show up. And if that's your case, you know, if you haven't already ruled out gluten as the potential, you definitely would want to make sure that you're doing that. Every time a mild wind blows, I get an asthma attack. Any thoughts on why a breeze can wreak such havoc on the respiratory system? Yeah, you're probably, to a certain extent, you probably got some degree of immunocompromisation where your immune system's not capable of defending you from whatever, you know, dust, dander, weed, ragweed, or whatever else might be in that wind that's blowing your way. So, you know, I would, or either that or you're very, very allergic to something that's in that breeze. You know, so depending on where you live, like you know, common around South Texas near Austin is something called cedar fever, which, you know, is for people that are allergic to cedar, have a heck of a time with that. So it just depends. I mean, you might check out with an allergist to see what kinds of things you're allergic to in terms of outdoor stuff, and then that way you know, which, you know, if it's at all seasonal, you'd kind of know where to avoid and when to avoid certain places. But I would suggest that there's a more robust immune problem going on if you're having a respiratory attack just from a breeze, and you need to get that checked out. You know, there are a lot of different things that can trigger that. Food can be a trigger for you know, COPD and asthma. And so if you're constantly battling your food, then when you're exposed to outdoor environmental allergens and other things, you don't have the resources left to deal with them, and that can create a flare. And I see this all the time in people that go and change their diet from gluten full to gluten grain free, and now their allergies, their outdoor problems are become a part of their past because their immune systems basically are capable of rebounding. You recommend to take L-glutamine on an empty stomach. Can it be taken together with 2 to 3 more other essential amino acids? Yeah, it can be. It's best on an empty stomach by itself so that there's no amino acid competition for its absorption. But if you're taking it like in a general amino acid blend, free form amino acids, you should be okay. What's my opinion about autophagy and ketones? Is fasting suitable for everyone? You know, I think fasting is suitable for everyone who can tolerate it. Some people can't, especially people with severe blood sugar ups and downs. Those individuals have a harder time fasting. Many people that are under severe chronic stress and duress don't do well with fasting because their stress hormones are causing blood sugar swings, and then the fasting is not necessarily an ideal thing for them to do, at least not yet. So it just really largely depends on the person. Should one eat whole grain rice? No. Not in my opinion, not if you're trying to be on a gluten-free diet. Rice has a form of gluten called orzonin that I've seen be major triggers for many people, and then rice is also predominantly, any kind of modern rice that you're buying is largely, a lot of it's contaminated with lead and arsenic and cadmium and even in some cases mercury. So I wouldn't look at rice as a food that, if you're trying to follow the no grain, no pain, diet lifestyle, that you should consume. So Chlorine is asking about her blood glucose. Despite her A1C being normal and as well as her insulin, well, so first of all, Karina, it's hard for me to comment, partly because when you say A1C being normal, there's a range, just like with insulin, there's a range, and most labs today, their reference range for insulin goes as high as 25, and I don't believe insulin should ever be that high. I think insulin is in a fasted state should be 5 or less for a healthy person. And so if you mean that let's say your insulin is 15, so on the range of the lab it's normal, but I would still call that high, and that may be part of the problem. I don't know. I'm only commenting based on speculation because I don't have more details. But if your blood glucose in the morning is a little bit high, which it is in the hundreds, there are several reasons why that could happen. You could also have higher spikes of cortisol than what are necessary. Cortisol will cause glucose, to be dumped from your liver into your bloodstream. So if your morning cortisol is higher than what it should be, that could be part of your problem. And there are a lot of reasons why that can happen. But one thing I would encourage you to go and watch is, I have a video on, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's like what your doctor would never tell you about blood sugar. And there's 2 parts to that. And go watch that video, because there may be an answer in that for you. There's several vitamins and minerals that will affect the regulation of your blood sugar, B vitamins, chromium, magnesium, zinc. And so understanding and watching that video might give you better insight into the answer to your question as well. Can I have a slight headache from time to time because of 4 milligrams of omega? Probably not. That wouldn't be my suspicion, especially not 4 milligrams. I mean, 4 milligrams of omega-3 is not very much at all. When we talk about dosing for omegas, we generally are at 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams, not 4 milligrams. So I wouldn't suspect that. I mean, there may be an ingredient in your omega that you could react to. I get a lot of clients that are sensitive to lemon, and lemon is one of the main ingredients that they put in different omega formulations. And so I see it all the time where people are reactive to lemon and don't do well. What are my thoughts on LDN for autoimmune disease? I think LDN, as far as a medication, is got a really low side effect profile. But I think LDN for autoimmune disease is not the answer for autoimmune disease, honestly. I know a lot of doctors, promote it as a good, tool. To me, if you're having to go to LDN, it's because you've exhausted every possible effort to understand why you have an autoimmune condition. In other words, you haven't identified all the triggers, and so you're still having symptoms, and therefore you're using LDN as a means to reduce those symptoms. But again, the trigger still hasn't been fully discovered. That's my experience. I mean, I think in 21 years of practice, I've seen, less than what I can count on one hand, I've seen that where people, where we hit a point where we looked at LDN and said LDN may be a good match for that person, but it's super rare. If you're working with a doctor who's very investigative and can find the triggers, then you shouldn't need to default to LDN. That's my opinion. Can you eat creme fraiche, or should one avoid that? Creme fraiche, depending on the cream itself, I mean, creams come in different qualities, depends on the type of the cow or the animal, depends on what the animal ate, depends on whether or not you're allergic to dairy. Remember, dairy and gluten have a lot of molecular mimicry crossover, so a lot of people who don't do well with gluten also don't do well with dairy. So Pitt, we can put a link in for you on, about, it's just an in-depth article and video on dairy, so that you can get a little bit more information as to, what to be concerned about with dairy, because there are different concerns that we have when somebody's gluten sensitive with dairy as well. Could you make a video that covers the micronutrients of fat metabolism? Yeah, we can do that. Just, offhand, if you're on a keto diet, there's several risks, micronutrient risks that you're going to have as far as deficiency when you're following a keto diet. Probably one of the biggest is carnitine, also vitamin B5, also choline, also inositol. So those are things that you might want to consider, are either in your multivitamin or that you're supplementing with if you're doing kind of a long-term keto. But at the end of the day, everybody's different, and so one of the things that, I have a lot of clientele that are on keto, and for us, we test them every 6 months to make sure they're not developing those nutrition deficiencies, and that way we can adjust their diets and adjust their nutrition supplementation accordingly. I've never had proper periods, 12 years of trying to sort this out, thinking of going on HRT. Before you do that, Holly, go on a true gluten-free diet. It's very well documented that women with abnormal periods, a lot of times that cause is something called polyendocrine syndrome, which is an issue that gluten can contribute to. So if you have a gluten issue and you're not fully gluten-free, I see it all the time in women where their cycles return. I've even seen women who thought they were in menopause and their cycles returned because we changed their diet and they got healthy. So, HRT, in my opinion, is not necessarily the solution if you haven't dug into all the potential reasons as to why, and gluten is probably one of the best places to start, so start there first. Happy Doctor's Day. Doctor, I didn't realize that there was a Doctor's Day. Thank you, though. I appreciate the sentiment. Very much appreciate the sentiment. Okay, so hello from Pennsylvania. The 2-year-old son of a close friend or a close family friend has been stricken with what my friend calls seizures. The family is Amish and cannot participate in this call, so I'm asking the question on their behalf. Could gluten be a contributor or perhaps even the cause for these seizures? A pediatric clinic wants to run a brain scan and MRI on the toddler at a cost that the family can ill afford. Can you please offer other suggestions? Yeah, can gluten cause seizure disorder? Yes, hands down. As a matter of fact, there was a Discovery, if you guys remember, it's a cable TV program called Discovery Health, and it's been 15 years at least. They did an entire show. The name of the show was Mystery Diagnosis, and they did an entire show on gluten-induced seizure disorder. So, so that I say gluten and seizures are highly linked. So you definitely would want to let your friends know that. We have some articles and some interviews. I've actually had a number of interviews with neurology experts and psychiatrists on the gluten-induced manifestations, that can affect the brain and nervous system. So, if your friends that are Amish can't watch the videos, maybe what you can do, if we can pull up gluten and seizures for them, that we have an article and you can print that out and maybe take it to them and help them get some information to make some changes. But a copy of No Grain, No Pain, because what they don't want to do is they don't want to go on a traditional gluten-free diet and not see the results It's my experience that many people with seizure disorders that they cut out wheat, barley, rye, but they don't cut out corn, rice, sorghum, millet, teff, etc. They continue to have pervasive symptoms. And so this is where I make a delineation between a traditional gluten-free diet versus a grain-free or a true gluten-free diet. Okay, so Jessica's asking about intestinal defense. I mentioned this last week, how my family and we use something called intestinal defense as a parasitic preventative during the full moon. She's asking if we split the dose up. Yeah, 2 divided doses is the way we take that, 2 and 2. Do I work with children with PANS or PANDAS? Yes. Also, I bought a Farmer's Almanac pre-recommendation. So the answer to your question, Jessica, is yes. You asked if I take it 5 days starting with the first day of the full moon. The answer is yes. Do you like LabCorp for checking hormone levels? Sometimes it depends. It depends on the problem and the nature of the person's problem. I mean, LabCorp is a good screening where you can look at estrogen, estradiol, estrone, and testosterone, and some other of the hormones. But it's a good screening tool, but it's not as comprehensive as some of the other panels that I like to use that are measuring hormones through a combination of saliva and urine. Is it okay to take the supplements you recommend for severe osteoarthritic knees while taking CBD oil with THC? Yes, there's no contraindication in using those supplements if you're also taking CBD with THC. So, question about what kind of mold was growing in my home. Boy, we had, what we found, Aspergillus, Penicillium, Trichothecene, Fusarium, Chytomium were all there, and then we coordinated those things being present with the mycotoxins of those species of mold as well. So not only we have those species that we were able to measure in the house, but we also coordinated the types of mycotoxins that those species made coming out of, members of my family. We've got those of you who are possibly in mold or thinking about mold as an illness, just FYI, I've been working now for the past many months on the beginnings of a documentary, and I've got a lot more work to go in it, but it's something I hope to have done sometime next year, and it's going to be a pretty comprehensive documentary, and we're trying to do all that research for people who are in it because it's such a challenging time. When your house is the one place that should be your safe haven and it's actually killing you, that's a big pill to swallow. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of poor health. And when you combine all of those things together, it's a nightmare, and there's not a whole lot of objective information out there for what people can do. And we're trying to compile that and put that together in an easy to understand format. So be patient with me. It's a project we're working on. Let's see, signs of niacin deficiency. Lots of different symptoms of niacin deficiency. Fatigue. Niacin deficiency in a severe state causes a disease known as pellagra, which, if you've ever taken a nutrition course, they talk about the 4 Ds of pellagra, which is diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and death, because it can kill you. So a lot of people develop skin rashes or they develop bowel abnormalities. We know niacin deficiency can actually cause villus atrophy just like gluten can, right? So it's one of those things where you don't have enough. If you've ever had a scope and they told you had villus atrophy, and usually the GI doctors assume that gluten is causing the villus atrophy, but niacin deficiency can cause villus atrophy. Steroids can cause it. Certain blood pressure medications can cause it. Soy can cause it. Corn can cause it. Parasites can cause villus atrophy. But anyway, I digress. So we have a crash course, Jacqueline, on niacin. If you want to check that out, maybe we can put the link in. I like this comment. Marcia says, not a question, but a thank you. We got into a bad habit of adding in alternative flour products such as Simple Mills and crackers It became way too much a part of the daily diet. I could hear your words in my head, and my husband and I both knew we had to cold turkey get that all out of the house. It's been really hard, especially for me, but we're back to no grain, no pain and feeling better. Yes, so from time to time, I'll do a food or product review and talk about things that are grain-free, but the core message, and thanks for bringing that up, Marcia, the core message is this: if you are trying to be healthy, then bringing in a bunch of processed food items, even if they are grain-free, is not going to necessarily be your best friend. And a lot of people do poorly with processed food as a whole. I just don't encourage to make processed food a part of your staple in your diet. And so that's just a good reminder for that. How dangerous is an X-ray of the hip? Doctor refuses, stating it would cause certain cancer. An X-ray? I think that's a little ridiculous. An X-ray is very safe, especially if you've got a major problem that you're trying to get diagnosed. There's no danger in doing an X-ray of the hip. I think that's really weird that a doctor would say that X-ray, would cause, that one hip X-ray would cause cancer, or even 3 hip X-rays, because usually when they're taking an X-ray, they take a frontal view, a lateral view, and then usually what's called a frog leg view, where the hip is flexed upward. So those are very safe, very low radiation. I mean, as an example, Marianne, if you were to go in and do a CAT scan, you would get the equivalent of more than 1,000 X-rays in one CAT scan. So, I mean, I don't know why your doctor's refusing you. I would surmise, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I would surmise that probably the issue has to do more with your insurance covering it than it does to do with him worrying about you getting cancer. But that was his answer to you. So, again, I can't put words in his mouth, but I've seen cases where doctors refused to order procedures because they knew the patient's insurance wouldn't cover it, and so they didn't want to get stuck with the bill. And that, to me, that's an unethical way to go about practice. But that's why I don't take insurance ever, because I don't want another third party telling me what I should or shouldn't be doing, because they are not the ones that have the relationship with me and my clients. So, at any rate, I don't know why your doctor's telling you that, but it's just not true. I have both gout and dermatitis. What's the best supplement and best diet? There's not a best supplement and best diet for gout and dermatitis per se. The best way forward with something like that would be to get testing done, because gout is a manifestation of uric acid crystal formation usually inside of your joints, but your big toe is the most common manifestation. Sometimes in the ears or knees we'll see gout manifest, but the way to diagnose it is to do a joint distraction, and you can find actually birefringent uric acid crystals under a microscope. A lot of times doctors won't do that these days. They'll diagnose it based on more of a subjective criteria. Well, kind of. They'll say, oh, your uric acid is high in your blood, but then they'll also, they'll diagnose it based on your physical symptoms. But uric acid crystals present in the joint fluid is the only true way to know if it's actually gout, because there are other diseases that can mimic gout, like crystal pyrophosphate deposition disease. And in oxalate toxicities, I've seen mimic gout as well, where uric acid wasn't necessarily the problem. So testing is my point. Testing first, because you've got to get confirmatory, number one, of what are your triggers, number two, what the actual problem is, number three, are there any food triggers, are there any nutritional deficit triggers? In order to break down uric acid, you need zinc. Zinc runs an enzyme called xanthine oxidase that helps break down uric acid. So, zinc deficiency can contribute to that. So there may be, supplementation that could be helpful. Again, it's a lot to say I have 2 diseases, what should I do and what's the best diet? Because there's just not one simple answer I could give you. It's the picture's too complex. So sorry I couldn't be, more uniquely specific for you. If you're talking about vertical ridges, Laurie wants to know what might be the cause of vertical lines in my fingernails. Generally, it depends. So vertical lines in the nails are typically not considered pathological, meaning there's not like a disease associated with vertical ridging of nails. What happens as people get older is the growth of nail rate. The nail growth rate changes, and so you can get some overlap growth in the nails, which lead to the appearance of vertical lines in the nails. And that's not, again, it's not a disease or an illness. It's just a manifestation of age. My mother is on blood pressure and cholesterol meds, belching a lot. Besides weaning off of meds and changing her diet, what do you think is good for belching? It depends on what's causing the belching. A lot of people have excessive belching because they don't have adequate stomach acid. Sometimes people have excessive belching because they have an imbalance of the bacteria in their GI tract. So, probiotic might be a good thing to try and see if there's any help with that. A good digestive enzyme might also be something that you could try, because it could also be an enzymatic deficiency leading to excessive gas formation. So those are just simple things you might attempt. How to deal with asthma caused by GERD. Deal with what's triggering it. Asthma and GERD, two things come to mind: gluten. So if you haven't gone gluten-free, that's where I would start. Can negative thinking contribute to candida overgrowth? I'm using geranium and lemongrass topically, no help, or to help, but how do I alleviate the herx? So it's another one. It's hard to answer that specifically because, one, yes, negative thinking can contribute to a lot of problems. Negative thinking can affect your immune system. So if you have, a lot of stress and negative self-talk, is that going to impact the way you make antibodies in your immune system? Yeah. Stress can cause IgA deficiency, and IgA is a very important immune protein that helps keep the gut clean. So, if you're talking about candida overgrowth in the gut. So, so one of the ways, talking about alleviating herx symptoms, one of the things that I like to do if I'm taking somebody on a protocol is have them do a vitamin C flush before they start the protocol. A vitamin C flush, vitamin C1, it supports the immune system's capacity to help you, right? And so you want the immune system to be as strong as it can be going into something like that. Number two, vitamin C actually, there's a lot of research that shows it has antifungal properties. So, but the flush itself, which is the flush of the bowel, a lot of times if you have overgrowth in your bowel, you're pushing a lot of the species out through the mechanism of the flush, so that when you try to start taking things for the overgrowth, there's less candida or whatever it is you have. Candida is what you mentioned, but there's less of it to battle, so there's less of a potential for a herx response. I saw an allergist for a food sensitivity test. He said there's no such test for food sensitivity, only test for food allergies. That was a waste. I'm back on the drawing board here in New York. Yeah, I hate that for you, Mary Ellen. New York, we can't ship our food sensitivity test to New York because New York has crazy state laws, but we've actually had some people drive over the border, depending on where you live. They have a P.O. box or a neighbor or somebody, they have the test sent to a different, to a state bordering New York, and then drive across and get it done that way. That way they're not afoul of the law. The ideal dosage of vitamin D for autoimmunity depends on whether or not your vitamin D levels are deficient. So the best thing you can do is get your 25-OHD level checked. If it's below 30, for many people, 8,000 to 10,000 units a day is a good place to start, and then recheck your level in 3 to 6 months to make sure that it's coming up. My friend lives in Germany. She has a severe case of tinnitus. No help from her doctors. Any hope for her? A good doctor in Germany. Germany's a big country, but Christoph Ploth, I think, Plothe, has a practice in Germany, I believe. Would be the only one I could think of. You might look him up if he's close enough. It might be worthwhile visiting him. But tinnitus, yeah, there's hope. there's a lot of different potential reasons why people develop tinnitus. I mean, it can, oftentimes it's associated with B vitamin deficiencies and heavy metal toxicities. I've seen it associated with parasites. So a lot of different things to have looked at. What color is a quality characteristic for eggs? Deep dark yellow or rather straw yellow? No, deep dark. If you're talking about a real egg, super, super yellow orange. Like a chicken that's out grazing on grass and eating lots of bugs. Like my chickens, our eggs are more orange, actually golden orange, than they are yellow because of the rich carotenoids that are in the diets of those birds. So, what you get in the store, which is this pale anemic egg that's super, kind of, I don't know, it's kind of yellow, but not super deep and rich in color. Those are, to me, that's very much an inferior food. Peanuts in the shell, okay. Yeah, if you're not allergic to peanuts, you remember peanuts are a legume, so if you're trying to follow phase 2 of no grain, no pain, they wouldn't be allowed in that part of the diet, but they are gluten-free. The best treatment for vitamin B6 toxicity is to discontinue any vitamin B6 that you're taking and drink a lot of water because B vitamin 6 is water soluble and it has a relatively short half-life and you'll flush it out of you pretty quick. My opinion about Chlorine, some people need to be on it for pancreatic issues. It's this very strong pancreatic enzyme. I've also seen people be able to get off of it, but it's an enzyme, so of all the different types of prescription drugs, I would say it's one that sometimes is definitely necessary, depending on the person's situation. What can be the reason for my small toes to swell up while my feet are hot and red? Poor circulation. If you're hiking and you're swelling up, poor circulation, weak heart are issues. Being overweight can be an issue. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that could happen. Let's see here. So I've been taking synthetic thyroid hormone for 25 years every morning on an empty stomach. Can that cause or worsen gut issues? It depends. If you are gluten sensitive, depending on the type of thyroid medicine that you're taking, some thyroid medicines contain corn, and I've seen that be a very big problem in people with gluten issues. So that's a possibility. Look at your inactive ingredients on your thyroid medication, and then go visit Gluten Free Society. We have a special page that tells you how to identify hidden forms of gluten and cross-reference the list of ingredients to that page. Can I get enough iodine while eating good meat and chicken but avoid fish due to sensitivity? Depends on where your meat and chicken are eating. So there's an entire area up in the central north and northwest. It's called the goiter belt, and it's because the soil up there is very devoid of iodine, and so even the animals grazing are not getting adequate iodine in their tissue. So you could end up with a goiter if you live there and you're eating things from there. But it depends. Everybody's a little unique. You can get iodine from other foods, but again, a big part of it is what is the iodine content of the soil where you're getting or where you're acquiring your food from. I was just diagnosed with a recurring chondritis, which is rare. It attacks the costochondritis or chondritis. I'm presuming that basically just treating all my symptoms and things with AIP. It's a good place to start if you have an inflammation in your cartilage that flares and you don't know why. I mean, you can't hurt yourself by starting there. There may be some other triggers that you have, but it's definitely a good place to start. For dark circles under the eyes, is there any food sensitivity test that can be done? Yeah, I mean, we carry a food sensitivity test. I can put a link down below for you, Bridgie. Meaning of MCV on a lab. MCV stands for mean corpuscular volume. So what a corpuscle is a red blood cell. So mean is average and volume is size. So basically it's the average size of your red blood cells. If your levels are high, it's an indicator that you have something called a macrocytic anemia, a large cell anemia, and that can be caused by a number of different nutrient deficiencies like B12 and folate. Vitamin B6 can cause it. So those would be good places to start looking. How long does it take being grain-free for symptoms to start to clear? You got to give it minimum 6 months, Kim. A lot of people feel better before the 6 month mark, but it takes 2 to 3 months just to get gluten out of your system. The gluten antibodies have a half-life of 30 to 60 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it takes a good while just to get the gluten that you've been eating out of your system. So you've got to go at least that long before you're going to really start to notice any kind of major improvement. Catherine wants to know, are the LRA food test and the gluten test that you offer online the same ones that you do in your practice? And the answer, Catherine, is yes. There are substitute products for pasta made of lentils and peas. Would you recommend it? I wouldn't recommend it as a staple food. If you can tolerate lentils okay and you're not in phase 2 of no grain, no pain, it would be acceptable, but I just would tell you eat it on the occasion and don't make it a major part of your diet because, again, it's a highly processed food and we get in trouble with highly processed foods, especially when they become the primary agent of our calories. Can I ask your opinion on Ezekiel bread for gluten sensitive? Yeah, Ezekiel bread's not gluten-free. It's sprouted bread, but it's still full of gluten, so if you're gluten sensitive, you wouldn't want to use it. Let's see here. We got more questions than I got time to answer. Is there treatment for TBI with white matter changes? Yeah, yes, treatment's maybe the wrong word, but there's nutrition that can definitely be implemented to help your body heal, repair, and recover. I don't know if that was your exact question, but that's my answer. I'm currently on gabapentin due to chronic nerve pain. I went off this horrible medication, or I want off this horrible medication. Are there any supplements that help with withdrawing from this medication? Yeah, CBD is a good one for nerve pain. We have something called Ultra Hemp that we use sometimes when people are trying to transition with nerve pain. But alpha lipoic acid is another good one if you haven't tried higher doses of alpha lipoic acid. Medical literature actually has several studies show alpha lipoic acid as an effective agent to treat neuropathy. And I've seen good outcomes with using higher doses of alpha lipoic acid in my practice as well. My practice is in Sugar Land, Texas, but we don't take any type of insurance whatsoever, Mary. Like I said earlier, I just don't want any third party telling me what I should or shouldn't be doing with the people that entrust their health to me. Is it okay to take diatomaceous earth? The question there is for what, for how long? And the answer is yeah, it's okay to take it. It's just not okay to take it indefinitely. Well, why don't I talk about new celiac drugs? Because I think it's a pipe dream. I think trying to create a drug to treat the symptoms of a food protein-induced inflammation is a fallacy, and it's not right for the people that are going to believe that that drug is something they should do, because it's a false hope in a sense, because those drugs are not going to fix the problem that that person's reacting to gluten. They're not going to change the fact that their immune systems inherently are reacting to gluten. They may suppress the symptoms. They may suppress the person's ability to manifest, an outward symptom, but they're not fixing the core of the problem. And I'm not a fan of chemical manipulation without ascertaining the origin, especially in a disease. It's such an easy treatment. So many people, I'm going to use the term whine because I think that's it. I mean, they whine about having to change their diet because it's hard socially, or it's hard, they can't eat out as much, or they can't, basically they're whining about not being able to continue to poison themselves. And what they should be appreciative of, in my opinion, is that they have a recognized cause for their chronic autoimmune disease that requires diet change and diligence on the front of diet. And they shouldn't want to throw a drug into that mix to mask their symptoms so they can continue to eat a poison that their body has already manifested autoimmune disease from. And that's the way I feel about pretty much that entire drug pipeline of celiac. I think the only reason they're trying to develop these drugs is because the gluten sensitivity spectrum has grown so much in the past 20 years, largely largely as a result of the work of myself and some of my colleagues, that they're trying to monetize and capitalize on people who don't know any better. And I think that's predatory work. That's my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of advancing science, and if these guys can figure something out where there's a way to protect people who are still symptomatic and they're doing the diet right, I'm all on board for something like that. But I just don't think they're going to find a medication that inhibits a biochemical process that doesn't come at another cost. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is the phraseology that comes to mind. And drugs come at a cost, and they're not free. And is that cost going to be greater financially? Number one, a financial cost, but also a symptom side effect cost, a risk benefit ratio, if you will. And so, in my opinion, I just don't think that that's the right way to go. Especially considering I've seen more cases of refractory celiac and autoimmune problems, where when you change their diets to be unique for them, when you actually did the right testing and you actually corrected nutritional deficiencies, they got better, even though the medical system called them refractory. So I don't believe that there's any really true such thing as a pure refractory celiac. I think that most celiacs that are not responding to the traditional wheat, barley, and rye-free diet are not responding because they're also reacting to other forms of gluten. They're not responding because they have bad habits or bad behaviors that are also contributing to their poor health. They're not responding because they have chronic long-term vitamin and mineral deficiencies that are not allowing their bodies to properly heal or repair. And if you look at those things first, these people get better, and then that brings up, well, we don't need a drug to treat it because you just have to go after the trigger. Anyway. NG, no grain, no pain, 1 month, feel great. Made the nut oxalate mistake and stopped B vitamins too soon. I'm beyond thrilled how good one can feel. Thank you. You're welcome. That's great. I think we'll end it on that highly positive comment. Actually, we'll go with 2 positive comments. Catherine says, thank you, Dr. Osborne. I just completed your glutenology masterclass and it was so informative. I highly recommend it to everyone. So we'll end it on that. If you haven't taken the glutenology masterclass, look, it's free, no charge. You just got to go sign up. We can put a link into the feed. Gluten Free Society, or it's glutenology.net/registration, and check it out. It's free. The knowledge in that class might just save your life, might change your life. Either way, whether it saves it or changes it, put one on the board for good health. For the side of good health. So thanks for joining me. We'll be back Tuesday for another great show. I've got a special guest this week coming up on the show, so you're not going to want to miss that. Have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you next Tuesday.